SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. My name is Todd Kirk. I'm your host. I'm joined by Casey Trujillo, my brother in arms, my longtime compadre, who this morning I learned recognizes when I'm sad and when I'm angry. Casey, glad you're here with me, my friend.
Oh, Todd, I think your wife always says it best when she stops by the office and leaves you a little love note that she says, not from Casey, just to let everyone know. Todd, it's always a pleasure being a partner with you in this podcast.
Thanks, Casey. You know, I'm really, really excited about this episode today because we have Anthony Pierri, who is the co-founder of Fletch PMM. He's a product marketing. It's a product marketing consultancy that helps B2B startups sharpen their positioning, better articulate their value propositions, and then they help translate those into outputs that basically help you rewrite your homepage. And since Fletch started, Anthony and his partner, Rob, have worked with over 300 venture-backed startups. And to be honest, I came across Anthony probably about a year ago. I've been following his content for a long time, and I love it because of the fact that Casey and I are not marketing guys, Anthony. So like what you and Rob post on LinkedIn is super refreshing to us because you see the world in a way that most of the people we talk to are totally blind and oblivious to. And so that's why I'm super pumped for this conversation. So Anthony, welcome to SaaS Therapy, my friend.
Yeah, super glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Anthony, we'd like the guests to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. So I do something called Would You Rather? So I'm going to give you two options. You choose which option to go with, just kind of break the ice, get people to know you a little bit better. So question number one, Anthony, would you rather bring a website back from the dead with incredible messaging or multiply a single message to work across all platforms?
Oh, man. Can you explain that maybe a little more, that second option, just so I understand?
I'm not
what you're
even sure
asking?
he knows what that means, Anthony.
Okay, so I think multiply a single message is take that single message and go deep with it. Would you want to be able to take just one, one of the things I love is Ed Milet. He's one of my favorite people that hosts a podcast. And he says the power of one more. It's so simple, but so deep. So would you like to take just like kind of a single message and multiply that and make it deeper?
I think I understand. I'm gonna try to translate Casey, Anthony, because I'm not sure this makes a lot of sense. I think what he's saying is, would you rather have one positioning statement that is going to work across lots of different companies, like have a vision or a message that you could push, or would you rather help a single company get their message really deep, rather than like going wide with a message across organizations or sticking super deep with one organization's message?
Okay, now you've lost me again. I thought I was tracking with you with the time.
I know.
A couple of your phrases, I got confused. I was like, wait, are you saying me as a consultant, am I helping? Are you saying, am I helping one? Would I rather help one client?
I love
it. Because the original question,
I don't know. Casey lost me. I was trying to interpret it.
I was there. Anthony and myself were driving. Todd ruined it. So we'll throw that message out. We'll go to an easier one.
Also, wait, just for us behind the scenes, and I think you guys you mentioned there's an editor. Now Casey sounds like he's clipping his microphone, so it's getting distorted. Maybe so. I don't know. Maybe you guys both turn down a little or something.
Okay. Turn that one down.
Maybe Todd just has a nice preamp or something.
I'll turn mine down a little bit too.
Because Casey, I was like, you guys are going to listen back and be so annoyed. That sounds better.
Okay, that sounds better.
Good.
He just got really excited, and that's probably why it started clipping.
Yeah, maybe that was probably that happens to me also. Okay, Anthony, how about this one? Would you rather work with a client that has too many ideas about their messaging, or one who has none at all?
Ooh, no idea versus too many. I think the too many is probably worse than no idea. No, actually, I'm going to flip it. I'm going to flip my answer. I think having ideas is better than no ideas because you could narrow them down and prioritize. Sometimes we get into client workshops and there is no angle because they have no differentiation. They're not willing to say anything. They're highly commoditized. And so it's like, there's nothing we can really do. And a lot of times at that point, we realize this is not a positioning problem. It's a product strategy problem. Like if there's real no way to do it from a marketing front, then you actually probably need to change the product so that there actually is some sort of message we can hang our hat on. So I think I would take too many ideas rather than no ideas.
Awesome. Okay. Last one. Would you rather work on a site that has excellent visuals but confusing text, or one with great copy, great messaging, but outdated design?
I think from what we've seen from the research, the text can play a larger role in getting people to understand the product. And like there's a guy named Pep who runs a company called Winter, and they basically let you do message testing. So you can take your website, put it in front of a group of people in your ICP, and they'll leave feedback. And he's got like a big pool of people who do this, so you can get results like really quick. Sounds like I'm like a sponsored ad or something. I'm not sponsored by Winter or anything, but just really great product. So he has found that the text usually matters more than the images, although there is probably a point where that flips, where it's like if you land on a website and it looks like it was made in the early 2000s or late 90s, that might be so bad that it tips the scales of like, I don't even want to trust this company to even read it, right? So it's like there's some base level threshold of images or design aesthetic that you have to be above. And if you're across that baseline level, I think the copy is way more important. But if you're not even up to that snuff of just even looking like a semi-modern website, I think people won't even read the copy. So maybe that's not a real answer, but
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah. But it makes sense. I mean, spoken like a true professional off of that
Great.
one. I love it. I love it.
There's a minimum threshold, and once you cross that minimum threshold, the copy matters a lot more.
Yes.
If you're, if it's so bad, then you can't even get them to pay attention to what it says. It matters.
Exactly.
Anthony. So that's for me. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, mostly because when I first started following you, it was like a really big aha that like, oh my gosh, every single SaaS company in the entire world does the exact same thing. They all have terrible positioning on their website where it gets super focused on these really fuzzy kind of business jargony benefit statements. And I feel like for a really long time, I had this problem with our own company where I would have people that Casey and I had met at like a show or a conference, and they're like, oh, y'all are really cool. We get on a call with them. And the very first thing they'd say is, hey, we went to your website. And honestly, I'm like, really, what do y'all do? Like, I'm really confused. And so I'm really pumped about this because I think it's so relevant for so many people in the SaaS world to start thinking better about how do they articulate who they are and what they do. And for me, I'm curious, what's your kind of 30-second pitch to people to realize that they're thinking about their positioning and their messaging just the completely wrong way?
If you're in software, you cannot take marketing lessons from physical product companies, which is what we all do. We look to the Nikes of the world. We say, how does Nike do it? Or they're selling this emotion. They're selling this, you can become this athlete, or Red Bull, right? Like if you drink Red Bull, you're going to be this extreme sports person, or Patagonia, you're going to be this, mountaineer who goes out and climbs, these great peaks and things like that. But in software, there is a baseline knowledge that is missing, where I can look at a shoe and know that it is a shoe. I can look at a jacket and know it's a jacket. How do you look at software? It's going to be like a dashboard of some kind or some sort of, interface, but it's very amorphous. And so what everyone does is they look to B2C and the lessons that we learn there, and they say, well, we need to sell the outcome, forgetting that if you do not understand what the thing is, the outcome statements don't actually matter. So if I held up some sort of product, like a physical product, that was some sort of weird like blob with like gears sticking out of it, and I just held it up and I was like, do you want this? You'd be like, well, what is it? And I'd be like, it's going to boost your revenue. You would be like, I don't even understand. What am I looking at? And you'd be like, it will drive ROI for your company. Don't you want that? And I'm all the while holding this weird amorphous blob with no real explanation of what it is. I will just ignore that person. I'm like, I don't have any interest in whatever this thing is. You can't even tell me at a base level what it is or what it does or who it's for or any of those things. So I don't actually care about the outcomes. So people will say, on the flip side, they'll be like, but you're just trying to get people interested. You got to entice them. And it's like, yes, but again, we are inundated with enticing messages from cold emails, right? Like open your emails right now and you'll probably see a million people. Hey, how would you like me to boost your revenue by 200%? Up for a call? And you're like, I don't believe it. So there's all these sort of like clarity gaps if people don't understand what it is that you're selling because software is inherently amorphous. And then on the flip side, there's a believability gap that when you just promise business outcomes, people don't believe it because they've purchased software before that promised business outcomes and then it didn't deliver. So, and you're getting all these messages from all around, from cold emails and DMs on LinkedIn and stuff, people promising they're going to do X, Y, and Z. And so it's like we all took nobody cares about the product, nobody cares about features, they just care about benefits and outcomes. They took it to the extreme, and all of a sudden, the websites of all software companies forgot that they also need to explain what the hell is this thing and when would I use it. So that's like my stump speech. It's election day right now, so.
We're
perfect timing.
Well, it was beautiful.
So good.
We're going to double click on this because Todd, he's on the technical side. He has worked with the largest SaaS vendors to help them create a customer experience that will resonate, so people will want to ask, how do I do that? Like that sounds what I want to do. I want to do it in a better way. I like that idea. How do I actually do it? So he builds out those. I'm on the sales side. So on the sales side, I learned right at the beginning of my sales career, there's 3 things that people care about. I want to reduce risk, I want to decrease my costs, and I want to increase revenue. And you always sell to those 3 things. Never sell features, only sell benefits. You're flipping this on its head, if I'm understanding you correctly. Why do I want to lead with features instead of benefits? And that's where when I started looking at your post, when Todd introduced me to you, and I'm really looking through this, like it's hurt my brain for the last 90 days as I try to do a better job of following the things you're teaching, because it feels right, but I'm struggling with it. So help me continue to walk myself through this approach.
Yeah. So it really comes down to the medium that we are speaking of. So let's start with how software gets purchased at a company. Some initiative, let's say we're coming up to Q1, it's going to start in January. Some initiative gets determined by high-level executives. They say, we want to boost our whatever, business outcome, right? Then they turn to their team and they say, how do we want to accomplish this outcome? What do we think we can do? People start pitching ideas. Maybe we need to hire more people. Maybe we need to go after some new market. Someone else says, we need to buy software for that. Say, okay, well, what kind of software do you think we need? And somehow, for some reason, someone will determine what types of software they think they'll need. So they say, maybe we need a new CRM. And they say, great, go out and find a CRM that you think would make sense. So that's the executive speaking to, like, let's say a director level person. The executive is an executive for a reason and has, for lack of a better word, underlings who go and do the dirty work of evaluating software vendors for them. The executive cares about the business outcome because that's what they're being measured on. The directors are usually not P&L owners. So they're not actually thinking every day, how do I increase revenue? Like if I'm a director at Google, I'm not like, how do I increase Google's revenue this year? You're just not in that world, right? You're much more tactical, functional, team-based, department-based things is in your world. So let's say someone high up or someone somewhere thinks that we should get a new CRM. Then they go out and start looking at the CRM options. Maybe they visit Salesforce. Maybe they've heard about some other newer, cooler, modern CRMs, and they start looking at them. And what are they greeted with? This CRM is going to boost your revenue. Well, they already decided that in the first conversation that they think the CRM is going to boost the revenue. That's why they're looking for the CRM in the first place. So then they start going out and looking, and they're like, well, this doesn't actually help me determine which CRM would be best for me. They all say the same thing, boost revenue. That's the message that would matter for my boss, but my boss isn't the one shopping for it. They delegated it to me. So if they come back and they say, I found 5 CRMs that said they'll boost revenue, the boss would be like, okay, well, which one should we get? And it's like, well, this one promised 3x. This one promised 4x. Let's do the 4x. That's not how people think, right? They're going to go out and look and try to understand functionally what makes these products different that would make you choose one over the other. And so you have the decision, if you're messaging, let's say, for the website, of who do you speak to? Do you speak to the executive, the CFO, who's never going to see your website? Or do you speak for the people who are actually tasked with evaluating the software and trying to understand, is it going to integrate with the things we need it to integrate with? We'll have the workflows that will cover what our teams do. Is it better one for a different size? We're like maybe mid-market. We're not quite enterprise. Are we too small for Salesforce? Should we get something else? All those types of questions, most websites do not answer any of them. And they try to get them on a sales demo, and then they push them through this whole discovery process. It's painstaking, and they're really just trying to get to the financial buyer anyways. But, so we're at odds. We have this war between these two sides. And so in that middle stage, leading with, this is what the product actually can do. Who is it for? All those like features and capabilities, functionality stuff is really actually the more customer-centric way to message, knowing that that's who's actually going to be reading the page. But to your point, Casey, let's imagine that someone has championed the software internally, that they're the one whose ass is on the line to make sure that this project goes well, like buying the software and actually delivers on what we said. When they go to the CFO and they're like, okay, we think it's this vendor. I've narrowed it down. I did my due diligence. I met with multiple ones. Maybe there's an RFP process in there, and they narrowed it down. The CFO is going to go like this. Is this actually going to move the needle? And then that's when the salespeople of the company, good account executives, will say, let me show you how we actually drive the business outcomes. So it's a flip of order. It's like trying to match the messaging for the medium for the correct person who will be involved in each of those stages, right? So, and back to that first initial meeting where everyone's trying to figure out what to do, the person who suggests the CRM likely had been marketed to by a CRM company that was selling like problems and how they would solve them. And those are not going to be, again, the champion who's a director who's like, I think we need a new CRM, is going to be sold on ideas about usually functional things. It'll be like, is your CRM really, clunky and cumbersome? Are your reps not adding stuff? None of those things are business outcomes. But someone will see who's lower level, living in the actual day-to-day realities of a business, not thinking about top-line revenue of Google, but thinking about like, how are my reps actually doing, will be sold on more real problems that end users might run into. And then they'll need you, the CRM company, to provide them with the business outcomes to convince their boss. But again, it's in that order. It's not leading with the outcomes and then explaining functional things. It's the other way around. And so that flip is really hard for people to do. And there's a ton of reasons we could go into of why people refuse to do that change, right?
I love that. It's like going back to your B2C example. It's like, well, I want to know if I didn't know if I was shopping for a shoe or a jacket, then my life would be really difficult, right? It's like, well, I'm looking for a shoe. Are you a shoe or are you a jacket? And I think that's why a lot of people really struggle in that world. I'm curious, Anthony, you mentioned the example of like boost your ROI by 2x, 3x, 4x as the like kind of one of those common sins. What are some of the other, what would you say are some of the other like really kind of egregious, just hurt your heart when you see on somebody's website as their big banner and their big lead statement?
Yeah, I mean, people will attempt to call out who the product is for, and they will use like the broadest possible things in the world, right? They're like, this. I think I saw one today that was like the CRM for everybody, and you're like, great, that's amazing. What a narrowed marketing field, like I'm sure your go-to-market team is stoked to just start messaging to everybody, So like the refusal to focus is a really big issue. And it's not an issue just for large companies. It's every stage of the company. You are always being gravitationally pulled towards broad, ambiguous messaging. And it happens at different reasons. So early stage companies who haven't found really any traction yet, they don't want to narrow for fear of picking the wrong segment. And it's like this clip from the Silicon Valley show where the guy's like, don't we need to get some revenue? And he's like, no, don't get revenue. Because if you say revenue, then people will always want more. You need to be pre-revenue. Then you could be worth any amount. So like early stage founders are like, well, we don't want to actually make a bet because we're living in this la-di-da land where we're like, this could be a unicorn one day, right? So early stage companies don't want to pick because they're afraid of picking the wrong thing. Growth stage companies, let's say you get your Series A funding and you sold the investors that you're going to be a unicorn. And you're like, we've gotten traction. We're at $1 million ARR. We think we could be at 50 million. So we need your money for it. And they're like, great. And they're like, how are you going to get there? Like, we're going to dominate 10 industries at once. And they're like, love it. Here's, open the checkbook, give you the money. And then the same reason they don't want to focus is they're like, well, we just sold these investors that we're going to dominate retail and logistics and, IT and healthcare. So we got to go get them all at once. And they end up with this super broad messaging that doesn't appeal to any of those segments. And then the mature companies, they also struggle with the broad, vague messaging. But at that point, they actually do have traction. They likely have multiple product lines and business owners who actually do own the P&L for their specific product lines. And now you have the turf war problem. And so everyone is like, if I could get my product at the top of the homepage, oh my gosh, imagine what that would do for sales. And usually leaders who are lacking in courage and don't want to actually deal with a business strategy problem, what they will do is put a Band-Aid on it and hire a brand agency and say, we need to get us all aligned. So they bring in the brand agency and then they run them through a multi-million-dollar thing where they get a new logo, they get some new colors, and they get a sick tagline. And the tagline is super vague and ambiguous. And all the business leaders are like, well, I mean, this isn't really going to help my product, but at least it's not going to help Jeff's product either. Like none of us get to get the spot. So I guess, we'll all be okay with, Slack, where work happens. Like, all right, I guess I'm fine with that. And then we end up with the unclear, vague messaging again. So it's always the challenge. It's almost always a lack of decision and courage on the top executives that leads to this problem. So which makes it a very difficult thing to fix. It's not something that like the little peons over in marketing could fix. It really is like strategic executive decision-making that is usually abdicated.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Anthony. Okay. This is definitely SaaS therapy today. I'm getting some therapy in here. My mind's going, it's running. Anthony, help me with this one. You recently did a post. And again, I think we said this at the start. Todd said this at the start. Follow him on LinkedIn. The content pieces are like, I feel like I should pay you for the content you put out. You had this one about you analyzed like 2 or 3 companies just recently and said, okay, here's where they're started, and now they're trying to grow into something that maybe they're not, or it's just confusing. One of the things, I'm going to go personal here. I'm going to be vulnerable with you, Anthony. One of the things I struggle with is the platform that I sell is introducing a new way to work. And there is a standard way in which every SaaS organization works today. And so because I'm presenting a new idea, it's causing people to think, and it's like, well, that's not how everybody does it. What would be some advice you would give to me? Because I feel like my biggest blocker is I'm introducing such a new way to work that it's completely different than how they do it today. And they don't want to take a chance. They want to be safe. So what are some tips without knowing, again, everything we do? And I know you have a bunch more questions because you always ask great follow-up questions. What are some advice when someone's trying to enter into a market and they're presenting a different way than which they want? Just think about like Uber with taxi drivers, right? It was completely different. I remember when people told me about Uber, I'm not getting in some stranger's car. I'd rather go with the taxi car that's broken down and smells horrible. Why would I want to go with a private driver, right? Like, it was just hard for me to rationalize that. How do you do that? How do you break through in an industry that is so set in the way that they want to work?
Well, so this is why actually what you're pointing out is exactly why we tell people you can't really A/B test significant positioning changes or shifts or anything like that. Because what you're describing, right? Even with Uber, if you had gone out and did like an A/B test of like, do you want to get in a stranger's car? You'd be like, everyone would be like, I guess nobody wants to do this. There's no market, right? So when there is significant behavior change, mindset change required. This is where it's like truly the gut and courage and, endurance of the founder that can shift the whole world or their corner of the world into doing something new, like through force of will and marketing. And the problem is sometimes that's successful and sometimes it's not, right? Like we see with Elon Musk, love him or hate him, super controversial, has single-handedly kind of brought the EV revolution into the world. And now all the biggest car companies are getting EVs. They're all using the Tesla charging standard. If you had A/B tested when he started, right? Like, would you want to buy an electric car? People are like, no, why would I want that? But again, through sheer force of will and through powerful tactics of distribution to constantly get in front of people, he's able to bring this together. On the flip side, you had a lot of promises with crypto and Web3 that have not materialized yet. Or VR and AR and all that type of stuff, we're all going to live in the metaverse, have not materialized yet. And now is that because they could never work? Or maybe it's too early? These are the questions of entrepreneurship that make it so difficult. But in general, what we've seen, even with our own business, is that when there is significant behavior change, it just means the amount of exposure to the new ideas and time horizon before someone could be interested in it just gets increased by exponential amounts. Like we, for example, if we had gone out and asked people about positioning and homepages and all that stuff, this was not something that people were buying. Nobody was buying a rewrite of just the homepage. You'd work with a company to rewrite your whole website. Like just working with someone just on a homepage with no design, just a copy of a homepage, like that wasn't really a thing. And then linking positioning in homepages, there's like prominent positioning people, like some of the biggest experts who were saying on their platforms, you can't see a company's positioning on the homepage. So there was all these things working against this positioning, but through continuous posts on LinkedIn that got traction, lots of distribution from the organic algorithm, compounded over and over and over. People, when they get on sales calls with us, they say, I've been reading your content for a year and I finally am convinced and I'm ready to work with you. So it was like it took repeated exposure. And you could see this with the people who have bought into crypto, bought into Web3. They're like, I thought this was so stupid at first, but I got in some groups or I, follow certain people and I see it over and over and over again. And eventually my mindset changes. So basically it's like anytime that you're going to do something like that, the trade-off is if you can convince them, you will likely be the market leader, right? Like Tesla is the market leader in EVs because they kind of did the work to shift. That's not always the case. Sometimes it's the follow-on who comes in, takes all the work that you did and then just steals the idea. Like, and this is not a shot at them, but this is like Apple's strategy, right? They're like, get people to do something brand new and let them get all the kinks and find product market fit, and then they'll add it to the Apple ecosystem and scoop it right up. So again, these things are tricky. Entrepreneurship is very risky for all these reasons, right? Doing something new has all these different factors that we can't really control or predict how they're going to work. But yeah, in general, broad strokes, it's like if you need more behavior change, you're going to need more education and an ability to get in front of the people over and over and over again to make your case.
Anthony, one of the things that comes to mind as we talk about this, because I'm soaking this all in. It's awesome. But one of the things that I see so often is there's people who are not in marketing and not in leadership who kind of I would guess there's a lot of people in SaaS companies who buy into your message before marketing and before leadership does. And, a lot of the people that we talk with, right, they're sellers, they're client success managers, they're out trying to preach the good word to their customers. Like, this is who we are. This is what we need to do. But what I constantly hear is that there's a disconnect, right? The seller is positioning us differently than the CSM is, and both of them are positioning the company different than the marketing team is. And so what would you say to the audience who kind of feels like maybe this is outside of their control? Like, what can you do to help your organization at least align around a message, right? Because to your point, it's going to take some guts. It's going to take some courage to make something happen. But how do you get that alignment across these various teams to start actually buying into, like, this is who we are, this is who we're going after, and this is how we're going to go and position who we are?
My hot take and my very pessimistic view, you can't. Leave the company, go somewhere else is kind of the advice. Like, having been working in lots of places and have always tried to be like, how do I lead up? How can I lead up? I have come to believe that leading up is not a real thing. Leaders are in charge because they're leading, right? They got there and they have a vision and they're hard driving to get to that vision. The reason they're at the top is because they led their way there and now are leading the company in a certain direction. If you do not agree with the way that they're leading or would like them to be leading differently, you will likely be unable to change their mind. Like, imagine you were like, I think that the way Twitter is being run is wrong. How can I lead up with Elon Musk? You're like, you're just not gonna be able to, right? And
Yep,
it's like, if you don't
50 billion and you buy it from him, duh.
there you go. Exactly. So in general, I don't think you can. I don't think you can change people's perceptions. I think they can potentially change on their own, but the amount of time and effort and wasted energy you will expend to try to move the needle, if you had spent it looking for another job, I think you'd be a lot happier in the long run, you know? And obviously it's like, you know, you can say, am I okay with the fact that this problem is probably not going to get solved in my specific company or not? And if it is okay enough that it's like, this is annoying, when we pitch it on the sales call, it's way different, like you said, than what the CSMs are doing and marketing's doing. They're like, that's annoying, but I can live with that. Then it's like, sure, stay in the company. But you are likely, especially if you're an IC or even a director, you're just not going to shift the culture. Someone at the top would have to have a come to Jesus moment, as they say, and make the change themselves. But it's probably not going to come from you.
Anthony, you've talked about over 300 different organizations that have maybe been in Series A or B or C. You've helped in helping them define that message to say, okay, here's who we are, what we do, right? Really, very simply. Out of those 300 accounts you've worked with, what is one of the successes that you just love to talk about? Is there one of those organizations that you could give us like a you know, that I had all this weight gain and then I lost all the weight and here's what my after picture looks like? Could you talk to one of those organizations that you've worked with of where you met them before, what you did, and then what it looks like after?
Yeah, I think one of them, and I unfortunately this is a very large publicly traded company, so we are under NDA, so I can't say the name, but they gave permission. They're like, you could share this, you know, just without the name. So this is a really big publicly traded company, which normally when we get those types of projects, we're like, this is going to be a waste of time because we're going to get people to agree, and by the time it actually makes it on the website, it's going to be so diluted from 50 different stakeholders, and you know, it's going to be useless. But we were brought in by the CMO, which is usually rare with a publicly traded company. We came in, we ran a series of workshops with them, and the CMO was like a huge believer in our methodology, had been evangelizing us to the team for really long. And so we came in, the page was like the prototypical enterprise messaging. It was the vaguest, most broad, like wishy-washy, like here's the company awards. Like, I don't know, go look at like Oracle or SAP or any of those people and you'll know what I'm talking about, right? And we actually got them to flip to a more functional, this is what the products do. And we got them laid out in a really clear way of like, you can explore our platform by product. This does this for these people. This does this for these people. Multi-product page, which is usually more complicated than a single product, like early stage company. And they launched it, and lo and behold, all the metrics went up. And they're getting, you know, hundreds of thousands of visits per month. A lot of times when we work with earlier stage companies, they simply don't have the traffic to even like really gauge, like, did this move the needle? It's like, if you're only getting 100 visits a month, you know, it's like, you just don't have enough to even run an A/B test. This company was huge, so they had tons and tons of traffic. And we saw all the right metrics go up, which was super, super exciting. And I think proves the point. There's another point. This is one that I can share. We didn't actually work with this company, but this was just another example. We were talking to the head of product marketing at Cognizant. And I don't know, for anyone who's on this, listening to this, if you go to Cognizant's website, let's see if they've changed it. Because the product, so they still have it. This is one of my favorite examples. They had a super vague message, very business outcome focused. And the former head of product marketing convinced them to flip it to a functional message. And so now I'm just going to read it for you. The headline on Cognism's website: we give you mobile phone numbers and B2B emails of people you want to do business with. Like, could not be more clear and functional of exactly what they do. They're like a data platform. They like, people use them in outbound sales and stuff like that. And they were like, they saw their conversion rate increase like 40%, like overnight. And it's like, because you just have to remember, why are people reading websites? Do they read them to be inspired? Probably not. Not if you're on a B2B software's homepage. Do they read the website to make sure that you drive ROI? Probably not, because we all know everyone lies about their ROI. The only reason people read websites is to gain information about what the product does and who it's for and how it works and things like that. So if you just aid in that journey, you will see all the things go up. And one more example, right? I talked about that company Winter earlier. They said that's like the most common question people get when they upload their sites and put feedback. The people will always just say, what is it? I don't understand what it is, right? Can you show me pictures of how it works? Like, can I see what it looks like? And it's hidden behind, the weird, like alien looking people, like blue skin and stuff, like animation, like weird illustrations. They're like, why don't you just show me what the product looks like and how I would use it? Like, does that seem like so much to ask? And for a lot of companies, it is.
Anthony, you mentioned earlier, if you're trying to create something that doesn't fit cleanly and you have to educate the market and you have to push and have will. And then you showed some examples of people who have made some shifts where they were a little bit more mature and they could see the results. Help me bridge the gap between those. If you're someone who's trying to figure out how to help people understand who you are, but it's going to take a lot of effort and time and energy. How do you know if it's working? So you mentioned some metrics. I'd be curious, like what are some signals? You mentioned things like conversion rate on your page as an example, but what are some other things? Like, how do you know if you're on the right track? How do you know if it's working or if it's not working?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. This is a super hard question to answer because it's like, again, everything is relative, right? Like if it's working, like for example, Google will launch a product. It'll get, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of users, and then they'll kill it because they're looking at, can we get billions of users, So like, was that working? I mean, to any other company, yes, right? And then you'll have other companies that are like, we launched this new thing, our conversion rate or our new, sales demos or whatever, they increase 500%. And it's like, because we had one demo last month and now we got 500% increase. So it's all relative, and you can really make the data tell any story that you want. Right, like that's a kind of like a not so kept secret of SaaS, and it's like we all know that we just kind of fudge the data to tell whatever story we want, and that's just kind of reality. Because all the data needs to be interpreted, and people, especially unless it's like truly like science experiments where it's like we did an A/B test, the button was green, the button was blue, more people click blue. Like okay, but any like real decisions that they're like, I'm making a data-driven decision. It's usually just a gut-driven decision that they've taken data to support whatever the gut decision was anyways. So all of that, right? Just knowing that that's kind of the reality. All these things are very relative. It's very nuanced in how we use this data and stuff like that. So in general, more qualitative ways to know that this is working are the people who get on sales calls with you, do they already kind of understand what you do and why you do it and have a good understanding? Like when you sit in a room with your team and you map out exactly what you think the customer should think and want, when they get on the call, are they parroting back the stuff that you hope they're parroting back? And if that's true, then it's like, yes, then maybe the positioning is right. Like this is a funny example. So I do Fletch by day, but I'm in a pop punk band by night. And so me and my brother, some good friends, we have this pop punk band. And we said when we started the band, let's apply all the same product marketing principles that we use to grow the business to grow the band. And so we picked a very specific audience. We were like, there's this group of, let's say, people between 30 to 40 who loved pop punk music in the early 2000s. Then pop punk as a genre veered away and doesn't sound like the music they liked from their teens. So now they're in their 30s and their 40s. And we were like, what if we just made the early 2000s pop punk music for them, marketed it to them, and basically said, this is the music that you listened to back then, as if those bands still existed and we're making music today. That's what we sound like. So we like literally like wrote that out. We had like a whiteboard session and everything. Like, so we were like, this is our positioning. This is what we're going to go for. And then we wrote these songs in that specific style. You could say that's like the product strategy. We marketed them on Instagram and tried to get on playlists on Spotify that were things like that. And then when people add us on Instagram, we will always ask, how did you find us? And we will hear them essentially parrot the exact same 10 sentences we wrote. This takes me back to my childhood. I didn't think that music like this existed anymore. I'm in my 30s and 40s. I'm working a desk job. I miss my old youth. You know, I used to be like a more punk rocker. And so like, to me, that's like the positioning is working, because it's like, you've taken the wall of separation between what you want them to think and what they actually think, and it's just gone. Like, if you think about positioning, what are you doing? I want to own a position in your brain, and I want to dictate the bounds of what that position should look like. And if I'm successful, it actually will get transferred like Inception style from your company behind the scenes into their brain. And so with Fletch, it's the same thing. When we get on calls with customers and they say, I've been messaging with all these vague business outcomes for so long, and it's because we didn't want to pick a audience. So we thought we could speak to everyone by just saying everyone cares about revenue. Let's just say that. Now I realize that I need to focus, and we're stretched too thin, and like all the stuff that we talk about every single day on LinkedIn. When they come to us, it's like, yes, the positioning has worked. Again, not an easy way to just look at a metric and be like, like no metric captures that exact translation from person to person. So it is slightly more qualitative, but it's like all things, if it's working, you should also see the general business stuff working as well. Like, is the company growing? Are you spending less money than you're taking in, right? Like all those types of basic level things. If those things are all not working, then you can argue that maybe the positioning strategy is not helping,
Anthony, one of the things I've caught myself in my career is I believe in that model that there's like 10% that are early adopters, 80% are the kind of the masses, and then there's 10% that are like laggards. The 10% that are early adopters and got it, I pretended like they were the majority. And so I would like, oh yes, we found it. This is the right messaging. But then consistently through the calls, they're like, I don't get what you do. And so I think that's one of the other things I would call out in what you just said there is don't be fooled into that small majority that does repeat back what you say. They're just early adopters. They connected their own dots. You didn't actually help them do that. So that's the only thing I would add to that. Anthony, a lot of our people on this call should be sharing this with your marketing team. You need to get this over there. You need to get them to listen to Anthony and help you out. A lot of the people that listen to this podcast, Anthony, they're in customer success, they're in customer education, they're CS leaders, they're sales leaders. If I actually wanted to start to do this, you mentioned these workshops where you help, the executive team really start to understand their ideal customer profile. You help them understand, okay, what are the messaging or what are the features that really make you different? If I was just trying to do this and I was just trying to test it out, let's say I'm a customer success manager, I have 50 customers I'm trying to renew, and I want to take this approach of lead with a feature. Could you give me like one or two things that I could think about and how I could just test that out on my own and basically be my own boss and try to test some of this messaging with them to get them to respond? Could you give us one or two principles that you might have me take and try to understand what you're doing at a high level with a website, how I might test maybe one or two of those things just in my interactions with customers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you have an account list of companies that you're servicing, I would think about segmenting them, not by the normal ways we segment, which is like firmographics, like company size, headcount, things like that, but actually segmenting by use case or like activity or workflow, right? Because if the bulk of what I do is in B2B, and I assume most people in customer success are also in B2B.
Yep.
And so the atomic unit of like what a product services is some portion of a workflow, right? It's like we're all doing work. So breaking up the 40 hours a week into chunks where we actually do a process or an activity or whatever word you want to phrase, those functional workflows, those are actually the most important things when it comes to segmenting. So like I would think about your product as what workflow are they using it for? And it's not going to be something like revenue, right? That's not really a workflow. It'll be something like, like take back to the CRM example, right? Like maybe these people are really using the CRM for, marketing automation or like something like that. That would be a different segment than people who are using the CRM to, map the pipeline stages or track accounts through the pipeline stages. So like for them, it really would come down to segmenting by use case or workflow, whichever word you want to use, and then trying to understand how can I best highlight how our product will support in that workflow. And if this is a brand new customer who you're just onboarding and you're trying to make sure that they're going to really find success, I would try to tie the things about my product related to that workflow as improvements to whatever they were doing before they bought our product. So for example, if someone was mapping the pipeline stages in a Google Sheet, like it's say a smaller company and they're doing their pipeline stages in Google Sheet, and they're like, why would moving to a CRM be more useful to keep track of the pipeline stages? I would start highlighting individual features like, hey, so remember how you had to manually calculate these things? Like now it's in this Kanban view where you can actually see them visually in a really nice place. When you drag them over, you can see both that the predictability of how likely they are to, close or whatever. That's going to be just right there, calculated automatically. And you can set up these things. We can help you set them up. So like you're basically tying the capabilities of the product, and we define capabilities as like what you actually do with the product, to solving issues of the old way that they used to do it, right? Like, remember how hard it was for you to figure out what the total amounts of these different things were, like, spinning up these reports. Like our software actually just does that automatically for you. Like once you get them in there, then it's going to just show you. And like, that's the stuff that like makes people excited because they're like, wow, I was doing it this way before and it was so annoying and obnoxious. I'm so glad that we brought this product. It actually makes my life so much better. And again, because most customer success managers, I don't think they're dealing day in, day out with CFOs and stuff, right? Like being like, hey, wasn't it so amazing how we boosted your revenue? Like that's just not the conversation. It's going to be like helping people with functional workflows because we're all doing jobs. We're doing jobs every day, and our tools help people in atomic levels of the actual workday. So like, again, nobody says from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. I'm growing my business, right? They're like, from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. I'm actually probably doing something. I'm writing my newsletter. I'm sending out cold emails. Like those are functional activities that you can actually market against and explain how products support in the functional levels.
Oh man, I wish we could keep talking, but I want to be respectful of your time. And now that we're running up against that 45-minute window, Anthony, this has been awesome. We always end every single one of these podcasts with the same question, because this is SaaS therapy. Every good therapy session is going to end with homework, right? There's got to be something you can do, some action you can take. So if you could give our audience one next step. And by the way, me and Casey are going to say, go follow Anthony and his partner, Rob, on LinkedIn, because that's a great first step. But what would you add? What's one thing that you could give people to do as a homework assignment based off of our conversation today?
For sure. I want you to answer four very simple questions. They're simple questions, very difficult to answer. I want you to go back and look at your website or look at your whatever, if you have some sort of messaging document or just something when you think about it. And I want you to answer 4 questions about your product. What is your product? And there are 2 acceptable ways to answer this. You can either say the product category it's in, it's a CRM, it's a messaging app, it's an email automation tool. Okay. So you can either say a category, or you have to say the exact use case that it supports. So for example, we use the example of Calendly. I think we booked this call maybe on Calendly. Calendly at the beginning didn't really fall into a category. So they were like, oh, it's a tool that helps you schedule meetings on, over email. So if you cannot list the category or the use case, the primary one for the most important group, you need to go and figure that out. So that's the first question. What is it? With those 2 options as potential positive answers. The second thing is, who is it for? At this point, I want you to see sometimes this is where it gets a little confusing, but sometimes answering the use case is also answering who is it for. So like, for example, there's a company called Small PDF. And what they would do is you would upload a big PDF, they would shrink it without losing quality, and now you have a small PDF, right? So if I said who's Small PDF's target, by saying it's for anyone who wants to upload a PDF and shrink it, I'm also actually saying the audience. But sometimes you want to further segment down from just the use case based audience to like, okay, yeah, well, lots of people shrink PDFs, but the real people we would want to target would be in these B2B companies that are of this size, right? So is there a specific type of company that would want to do that use case or want to buy that product category that would further sub-segment it down? Or is there a department that would primarily use it? So we say, what is it? Can either be category or use case. Who is it for? Could either be a type of company or a department, and maybe both, right? Like if you really narrow it down, you could have both. The third piece is when you have that person in mind, what is your product replacing? If your tool is not in the picture, what is it replacing? And again, there's two ways that you could answer this. If you picked to answer what is it with a category, like we're a CRM, likely what you're replacing is like an old CRM, some sort of legacy CRM, right? Like we would say that's the framing of, if you put yourself in a category, a lot of times you're just saying we're better than the other solutions in that category. Arc browser is a web browser. They said in the top of their homepage, we're the Chrome replacement you've been waiting for. So their competitive alternative is Chrome. It's very clear. On the flip side, if you're solving for a use case, you don't really fall into a neat product category, your competitive alternative is likely like manual process or some sort of stringing together tool, something like that. So those are kind of the two ways you can answer that question. And then the final question is, why is it better than that thing that you're replacing? And this is where we really get into like your differentiation. So the 4 questions: what is it? Who is it for? What does it replace? And why is it better? If you can answer those 4 questions at a decent degree of detail, you have effectively created a positioning strategy. If you remove any elements from those 4, you don't quite have the positioning strategy in place.
Mic drop. So good. Anthony, this has been awesome. Thanks for coming today, man. And we can't wait to keep following what y'all do, and can't wait to keep this conversation. I'm already doing the exercise in my mind, so I love it. Anthony, thanks, and we loved having you on today.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me. Super fun.
SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.